I am Mia, 27 years old, and I work as a freelance writer. It was supposed to be a solo retreat, a quiet weekend away from the noise of the city to focus on my writing. I had booked a charming Airbnb apartment in an old historic building downtown, attracted by its vintage charm and the promise of a peaceful atmosphere. The host, Mrs. Thompson, greeted me warmly as I arrived in the late afternoon. She showed me around the apartment, pointing out its quirks and telling me a bit about the building's history. It was a converted warehouse, now filled with eclectic apartments that retained their original industrial features. As Mrs. Thompson left, I settled into the cozy living area, unpacking my laptop and notebooks. The apartment was filled with antique furniture and knickknacks, giving it a unique character that I found inspiring. That night, as I sat at the desk by the window, typing away on my latest project, I began to notice strange sounds coming from the walls. At first, it was a faint scratching noise, like something or someone moving behind the plaster. I brushed it off as old building noises, but the sounds grew louder and more persistent as the night wore on. It sounded almost like whispers, unintelligible yet unsettling. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my writing, but the feeling of being watched crept up on me. Around midnight, I decided to take a break and make some tea. As I stood in the dimly lit kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, I caught a glimpse of a movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, expecting to see nothing but shadows, but instead I saw a figure, a woman in a tattered white dress, standing in the hallway. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes were wide and vacant. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she began to glide towards me, her movements graceful yet unnerving. I backed away slowly, my hand searching for something, anything to defend myself. Just as she was about to reach me, the kettle whistled loudly, startling both of us. The woman vanished into thin air, leaving me standing there, shaking and breathless. I grabbed my things and rushed to the door, desperate to get out of that apartment. But as I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. I tried the windows next, but they were sealed shut, as if by an unseen force. The whispers grew louder now, echoing through the walls like a chorus of lost souls. I felt a cold draft brush against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. In a last desperate attempt, I called Mrs. Thompson, praying she would answer. When she picked up, I poured out the terrifying events of the night, begging her to help me escape. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Mrs. Thompson spoke, her voice grave. "I'm so sorry, Mia," she said. "That apartment, it has a history, a dark history." She went on to explain that the building had once been a hospital, and the apartment I was staying in was rumored to be haunted by the spirit of a young woman who had died under mysterious circumstances decades ago. As Mrs. Thompson spoke, the lights in the apartment flickered and went out completely. I stood there in the darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps as the whispers surrounded me. Suddenly, the door creaked open on its own, revealing the hallway beyond. Without hesitation, I ran out into the night, leaving behind my belongings and the haunting memories of that Airbnb apartment. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the woman in white still lingers there, trapped between worlds, waiting for her story to be told. I am John, I am 32 years old, and I work as a software engineer. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway with my girlfriend Emma. We had booked a cozy Airbnb cottage nestled in the woods, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The pictures online showed a charming rustic cabins surrounded by trees, promising peace and tranquility. As we arrived late in the evening, the sun had already set, casting long shadows over the dense forest. The Airbnb host, an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins, greeted us warmly and handed over the keys with a smile. "Enjoy your stay," he said, his voice a bit too cheery for the isolated surroundings. The cottage was indeed picturesque, with its wooden beams and quaint decor. We settled in quickly, unpacking our bags and lighting a fire in the old stone fireplace. Emma put on some music, while I browsed through the books left on the shelves, mostly old novels and local history. As the night deepened, a sense of unease settled over me. The woods seemed to press in around us, the trees whispering secrets in the wind. Emma noticed my discomfort and suggested we go for a walk outside to calm my nerves. We strolled along a narrow path that wound through the trees, the moonlight filtering through the branches above. Everything was silent except for the crunch of leaves under our feet. Suddenly, we heard a faint sound, like footsteps crunching on gravel. I froze, straining my ears to listen. Emma gripped my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my heart racing. We turned back towards the cottage, walking quickly now. The footsteps seemed to follow us, growing louder with each step. I glanced back over my shoulder, but the path behind us was empty. When we reached the cottage, I locked the door behind us, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Emma made some tea while I checked all the windows and doors, ensuring they were securely locked. Everything seemed in order, but the sense of unease lingered. As we settled back in front of the fire, Emma suggested we play a game to distract ourselves. We sat cross-legged on the rug, the soft glow of the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. That's when we heard it, a soft tapping noise, like fingernails against glass. I looked at Emma, but she shook her head, indicating she hadn't heard it. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. I got up cautiously and approached the window, peering out into the darkness. There was nothing there, just the swaying branches and the stillness of the night. As I turned back to Emma, a chill ran down my spine. Standing in the corner of the room, partially hidden in the shadows, was a figure. A woman dressed in a flowing white gown. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she started moving towards us, her movements slow and deliberate. I grabbed Emma's hand, pulling her towards the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang. We were trapped. The woman continued to advance, her gaze fixed on us with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I searched frantically for a way out, but the windows were now sealed shut, as if by some unseen force, just as the woman was about to reach us. A voice echoed through the cottage, a voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Leave this place," it commanded, with a power that made the walls tremble. The woman hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. Then, with a mournful wail, she vanished into thin air, leaving behind only an icy chill that slowly dissipated. Emma and I stood there, shaken to the core. We gathered our things in record time and fled the cottage, not stopping until we were safely back in our car. As we drove away, the lights in the cottage flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. We never returned to that Airbnb cottage in the woods, but the memory of that night haunts me still. I often wonder about the woman in white. Was she a lost soul, a spirit bound to the cottage, or something more malevolent? Whatever the answer, I am certain that we were not alone in that place. am Selena, 21 years old, and I am a medical student. Last summer, I rented an Airbnb in a small town to study for my exams in peace. The cottage was isolated, surrounded by thick woods, and seemed perfect for uninterrupted study sessions. The first night, as I was reviewing my notes, I heard a faint crying sound. I brushed it off as my imagination, exhausted from a long day of travel. But the crying persisted, growing louder and more desperate. It seemed to come from the attic, a part of the house I hadn't explored yet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I grabbed a flashlight, ascending the creaky stairs to the attic. The air grew colder with each step, and a sense of unease settled over me. As I reached the top, I saw an old dusty crib in the corner. The crying stopped abruptly. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone. Just then, I felt a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. I spun around, shining my phone's light, but there was no one there. I bolted downstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, my mind racing. I tried to rationalize the experience, telling myself it was just my imagination. But sleep didn't come easily that night. The next day, I found an old newspaper in the living room detailing a tragic story about the previous owners. Their baby had died mysteriously in the crib upstairs, and the mother, overcome with grief, had taken her own life in the attic. The crying returned that night, louder and more insistent. It was accompanied by whispers, unintelligible, but filled with sorrow. Desperate to escape, I packed my things and fled the cottage, leaving behind my textbooks and the haunting memories. To this day, I can still hear the cries and whispers in my dreams, a chilling reminder of the ghostly presence in that isolated Airbnb. I've never returned, but the experience stays with me, a haunting echo of a tragedy that refuses to be forgotten.